Kicking off hour number 3 here on Hurrdat Sports Radio. I'm Ravi Lulla with Andrew Rogers. We are on AM 590 ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities, and KFOR in Lincoln. We are joined now to kick off this third hour with our friend Micheal Bruntz from Husker 24/7. Bruntz, how are you this morning?
Not bad. What's up?
Micheal, do you have your Connor Stallions recording glasses on this morning?
Yes, I do. I'm currently buying tickets to every college football game that I can find right now for my friend.
Listen, you got for your friend, for which you will pay them to go to on
and
Venmo,
you'll Venmo them and
publicly.
let them know that you bought tickets to the game.
my very public Venmo account. Yeah.
No, you seem more like a Cash App guy.
I don't even know what that is.
That's what Connor Stallions would say.
I got to write a check and I got to balance my checkbook while I'm sitting there writing it. That's how old I am.
I can't even remember the last time I wrote a check.
Dude, you know what the last
I don't know
time
if I've ever written a check.
was?
What's that?
I was buying soup.
You had to write a check to buy soup? What happened here?
There was a great soup place here in Lincoln. Shout out to Grateful Bread. And they don't take cards, but they take cash and they take checks. And I didn't have cash, but I had a check. Wanted some soup. I went and wrote a check for soup, guys.
So was it like
junky?
Was it like a $4 check? Like what?
No, I mean this is like good soup. This is like really good. Not like Yev Kassem type stuff from Seinfeld, but like good soup.
No soup for you.
So you got a couple things of soup. You got some cheese scones. You got a giant chocolate chip cookie. So it wasn't like it was like a $7 check or anything. It was you needed to write a check.
Imagine if you were in Seinfeld, you went after George, who said medium crab bisque, and Bruntz went up there with a check. Yeah. I don't know if you'd ever be welcome back either.
I think you might have been banned from the soup shop if you were writing the check there, but that's so funny.
If you guys are ever down in Lincoln on Thursday or Saturday, we'll go get some soup, and it'll be on me. I'll write a check. You guys can watch.
I think I'll see myself out.
Don't worry, I'll Cash App you the difference so I can pay for my meal.
Yeah, I'll get you money through Zelle.
Bruntz, as we kind of, I guess, turn our attention to football instead of checks and soup. We've got Michigan State coming up this week. I know that the coaching staff has said, like, hey, this team is closer to 6-2 than it is 2-6. I'm not buying it, if I'm being honest with you, Bruntz. I don't. Is there a couple places they could have got wins that they didn't? Sure, but I mean, let's be real here. This isn't a very good football team in Michigan State right now.
Yeah, it's coach speak, right? Like, they're not close to 6-2. They're not at all. But it's funny though. You look at their numbers, and they're not defensively. They're a little worse than Nebraska, but they're not that different than Nebraska numbers wise. It's actually. I was just kind of writing a preview for our Saturday stuff, and it's pretty close in a lot of areas. I mean, they give the ball away just as much as Nebraska's offense does. They're pretty similar in turnover margin. They can play a little defense. I mean, to me, this game is so much more about Nebraska. Like, Nebraska's defense is playing really well right now. They've got 6 takeaways in the last 3 games. They're also -3 in turnover margin in those 3 games, which is it's just mind blowing to me. But if Nebraska can take care of the ball, they get a couple big plays. This should be a game that Nebraska walks out of East Lansing being bowl eligible. I think this is just another test for this team of whether or not you can stay focused, you can stay, just thinking about the players across from you and not, what's out there, because the outside noise has gotten a little bit louder around the program. You've won 3 in a row and you're feeling pretty good, but Michigan State has a few guys that can make you pay if you're not dialed in, and that's the challenge for Nebraska. I mean, it's much more this week about whether Nebraska can keep from beating itself, in my opinion.
Bruntz, I mentioned this last week, and it felt a little weird to say out loud, but I think if Nebraska can keep the turnover margin to -2, that they're going to win most of these games on the rest of the way out. That feels weird to say because you're like, hey, you got to get even most of the time. You maybe get plus turnover margin. I feel like as long as Nebraska isn't totally disastrous, they're going to be in these games. Like, am I crazy, or is that kind of where we're at?
Yeah, well, I mean, Nebraska's kind of been a little lucky, right? I mean, with the way that Northwestern game started, I mean, they should not have been sitting where they were after that first quarter. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, that they were very fortunate that the defense came in and, I mean, kind of did what they've done all year. Yeah, I mean, a positive turnover margin for this group feels like a big ask.
It's a pipe dream at this point, right? Like, that's what it feels like.
Well, I'm just talking week to week. I mean, like, I feel like, even you would take that. I think they got this is a game where it's probably going to be a one-possession game into the fourth quarter. And I think that, as long as Nebraska doesn't have these, like, just mind-numbing fumbles that, even last week, I mean, a couple of them had, like, Hurrdat's fumbles when he's basically giving himself up for the play. Like, just get down. Like, it's not heady stuff here. So, yeah, I mean, I think they would potentially be in trouble at -2. -1, they'd be okay. If they get to 0 or close to even the rest of the way with the turnover margin, I mean, look out. You might be having to find hotels in Indianapolis in early December.
Bruntzy, I'm sitting here. You mentioned the bowl game. We're talking about kind of like the shakiness to this Nebraska team, and I'm thinking, take any team over the last 6 to 7 years. It was the stint from the last bowl game up until the potential bowl game that the Huskers are on the brink of securing. This. So, where do you think this team ranks among the teams that came 6, 7 years ago? I'm ultimately trying to figure out if this is the most talented of the bunch, or if this team's success is also a product of their opponents and not being, in the strongest of conferences this year.
Well, I mean, the Big Ten West has not exactly been a juggernaut during those 6 or 7 years. I mean, Nebraska was they'd won once against Northwestern and Illinois over the last 3 years combined. I think they're 1-5 against those teams. Similarly against Purdue, they just hadn't beaten them. So that the schedule's always kind of been the same. It's just always in my head kind of been about Nebraska, and the conversation for years was, oh, they're so close. This is the best, however many loss team in America, a 3-win team in America, or whatever. I don't know that this team has more talent. I think it's just being utilized in a really good way. I mean, I could probably go back to, I don't know, maybe the 2019 team. Was that probably the most talented one since
19 or 21, probably?
Yeah. Those are the two I was thinking. I mean, I think that both of those teams are a little bit more explosive on offense. I think they had decent athletes on defense that maybe I feel like probably could have been utilized a little better. So I wouldn't say this is the most talented team. I think this team is really bought in. I think this coaching staff is coaching really, really hard right now. And, I think they've finally figured out a recipe and coaching to that recipe to win these types of one-score games. I mean, just you go back through some of the games that Nebraska's lost since they've last been in a bowl game, and it's just head-scratching the way that they've done it. I mean, so many of those games you had, your defense on the field with a chance to win it, you couldn't do it. I mean, the Northwestern game where they go all the way down the field and score and win in overtime. The Purdue game where they kill you on the end around. There's just so many examples of those types of games. The way they absolutely folded on the road against Colorado. I mean, I think that's the difference with this team is that it's a tough group. They've got a damn good defense right now, and they're playing really good football. And I don't know that that's necessarily a talent thing.
Bruntz, this is a totally useless exercise, but it's something I find myself thinking about a lot. How many wins does either that 2019 or 2021 team have if this coaching staff is there instead?
Yeah, I thought about that too.
Way more than I should have, right? Like I've spent too much time thinking about that.
But it just, I mean, think about even like the special teams things that some of those teams and cost them games. You know, if they had just played even in special teams in a lot of those matchups, they probably were a bowl team. I mean, that's just the reality of, you know, what they were. And I think, you know, I think the thing that hasn't changed is I feel like the margin of error has always been very thin between, you know, over the last, you know, 4 or 5 years. It's just the defense is playing lights out right now. You're playing decent enough special teams. You're winning the field position battle, and you know you've been able to, you know, kind of ham and egg an offense, and you're getting it done. So it's still, you know, kind of precarious, but I think this coaching staff's done a really good job of getting guys to buy in and using what they've got. I mean, heck, you know, James Williams is in there for 2 games, and you know, most people wouldn't have been able to pick him out of a lineup, but before that game against Northwestern.
Bruntzy, November matters. Those were the words uttered by Coach Rule to his team. Yes, this is a learning experience, but this is what you play for. These are the games you've already prepared for, courtesy of the other 8 this season already. How real has it become to you, though, that this team is in striking distance of a bowl game and potentially something greater?
Yeah, I mean, I think you know, the conversation's definitely changed since we left Boulder. That's for sure. You know, it almost kind of felt like the sky was falling a little bit then, and you know, they've found a way to, despite a lot of things going wrong on offense injury wise, to make this work. And you know, I think that's a credit to the players, to the coaching staff. I mean, I think if you would have, you know, walked up to somebody walking out of Folsom Field and say that, you know, by the time this team walks out of or heads to Michigan State, they're going to have a chance for a bowl game, a statistical chance of making it to Indianapolis if things break right, they would have told you you're crazy. And you know, they've done a good job, I think, of just kind of sticking with the process. I think this coaching staff felt like it was going to be a slow build through the season, and they were going to play better football. But yeah, I mean, it's been a remarkable turnaround. And you know, I hear a lot. It's you know, the Big Ten West schedule. It's a bad schedule. It's the same schedule they've played for since it was Legends and Leaders. So you know, that they're beating the teams they should finally, and I think that's progress.
Bruntz, you mentioned, you know, the way the season started, and I think, myself included, I'm not sure I heard anybody project this team to make a bowl game that didn't have them at least splitting those first 2 games, and to now be in a spot where they went 0-2 and now they've won 5 of their last 6 is kind of remarkable, especially as you mentioned, considering some of the injuries on offense. I wanted to touch on that offensive line real quickly here. How did you think they played with those 3 reserves against Purdue as starters on that offensive line?
I didn't notice them, and
you mean that as a good thing, right?
Yeah, that's a good thing. I mean, I think, you know, when you look at the 3 guys that were in there, I mean, you know, Teddy had played a little bit, started some, and you know, Lutovsky's been a rotational guy, and you know, Justin Evans-Jenkins, they love him. They've been trying to get him on the field more. So it wasn't a total stretch that those 3 guys were out there. It was like, you know, somebody that's never played before. But yeah, I didn't notice them. I thought they were able to get enough done. I thought that Purdue front was actually pretty good. You know, number 4, number 5. I mean, they were a problem all day, and will be for a lot of teams. But no, I mean, for those guys to be kind of called in on really short notice and to play the way that they did, I thought they held up fine. I mean, you know, that's kind of all you can ask for, and that's, you know, the kind of line depth that I don't know that Nebraska would have necessarily had in years past. I'm trying to think of you know, there haven't been many teams where they probably would be able to go past like a 6th or 7th guy, and you know, you're basically replacing the entire left side of your offensive line with a week's notice. And they did pretty well, I thought.
Bruntz, this kind of goes more toward the rest of the season because I think the opponents that Nebraska plays down the stretch may have an edge over Nebraska in terms of a Vegas line. But what do you think this team needs to do offensively more going forward in order to feel comfortable in games when they aren't treated as the favorite?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you need, and I don't know if this offense is just what it's going to be, and they are who they are, or if there's an opportunity to, change this. But I mean, you just need a little bit more of a consistent run game with the running backs. I mean, that's been what this whole season has kind of been asking for, and it's been tougher since you have the injuries to Ramir Johnson and Gabe Ervin. But think about that Purdue game. I mean, you just needed to be able to turn around, hand the ball to Anthony Grant or Emmett Johnson, and trust those guys are going to hold onto the ball and just kind of push the pile. And I think that's the thing that I've been impressed with Emmett Johnson is it seems like he's a patient runner, and when he finds a crease, he goes. And I know he had the fumble against Illinois, but he seems like the kind of guy that that you can kind of turn to late in games to just kind of go into that 4-minute offense and choke the game out. I mean, that to me is what's kind of been missing and would probably result in a little bit less stress in the fourth quarter, is if you just have somebody besides Heinrich Harburg that you can go to and just kind of try to lean on people. The offense is going to be what it is. They're going to run some option. They're going to try to get it downfield for a couple deep passes. And I don't know what wrinkle is out there that we haven't seen already. So I think you just kind of have to work around the framework you have and give me a little bit more Emmett Johnson. That's what I want.
We're talking with Micheal Bruntz of Husker 24/7. Looking at Michigan State, obviously the quarterback situation there is a little bit up in the air. We talked to a Michigan State insider earlier in the week. He thinks it's going to be Leavitt. Does it matter who the quarterback is against Michigan State? It doesn't seem like there's been a ton of difference in what we've seen from the different guys.
Yeah, the young kid that was in there, blanking on his name.
Leavitt.
Leavitt. He at least has the ability to kind of give you some issues with his feet, I think. And that always kind of concerns me a little bit. I mean, I think Nebraska did an okay job of keeping Hudson Card in check last week with his feet, but he was able to scramble around and cause some issues. So, if you kind of have that fear of a guy being able to get out of the pocket on you, it does change how much you rush, how you rush. And I think Nebraska did a little bit of that last week, was a little bit more conservative with the way that they were doing things in the pass rush. So, I don't think it makes a ton of difference, but it also kind of worries you a little bit too sometimes. And as a fan of a baseball team that doesn't play meaningful games after like May, you do kind of get a little bit concerned when you've got a young guy in there who's kind of excited to be there and trying to prove something late in the season. Like, it feels like a team right now that's kind of willing to kind of play out the clock here, but the young guy wants to show what he can do. And I think that's a little concerning, even though, you're probably going to have some young guy mistakes and things like that. So it doesn't make a ton of difference, but I think a little bit more of a mobile quarterback does bring some different questions into the game plan.
Bruntz, got about 4 minutes left. I want to get a recruiting question in, at least the last one from me. Give us the latest on the Husker recruiting trail. While Nebraska's winning on the field, where do you see them winning off the field now, whether it's with a player you think is going to commit or the Huskers are at least winning the race?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're kind of still, in wait and see mode for a couple guys left in the 24 class. Grant Bricks is obviously the big one. He was at Nebraska last weekend for an unofficial visit, and that was noteworthy because he had said he wasn't going to make any more visits before he made his decision. He's going to go, I guess, now and see Kansas State again and see Oklahoma again. Those are basically the three schools for him. And he's the kind of developmental, talented offensive lineman that Nebraska would love to have to kind of wrap up its recruiting class. He's a 4-star lineman, really talented kid. So that's the big one to watch. And I think there's going to be continuing movement with the recruiting class. I mean, you've seen Nebraska pick up a couple commits over the last few months, even though they're at like 26 commits now. People always ask me, how's the math going to work on that? How are they going to bring in all these guys? It'll work out. I don't know how. I don't want to balance the checkbook on that, but I think it'll work somehow. So, I wouldn't be surprised if you see a senior film guy or two pop up still. They had Larry Tarver Jr., a defensive back from Florida, in last week for an official visit. So they're continuing to look around, and you got to play defense a little bit too with your guys. Certainly Carter Nelson has a lot of attention still from Notre Dame. Carlon Jones, the defensive line commit, who I think is probably overlooked in the importance of this class, is going to visit Ohio State later in November. So got to play a little defense and keep looking for some guys that can help you too. But it's kind of focusing down a little bit on the number of guys out there.
Bruntz, you're headed up to East Lansing with BC this week. Is that right?
Yes, we bright and early tomorrow morning.
I'll say, what's the itinerary like? You got any leisurely plans before you get to the game?
Well, we'll see what kind of trouble we can get into in Detroit.
I'm sure you won't have to look far to find it.
Yeah, I know. It usually finds you.
It'll be a little bit of a circus act.
It's unfortunate the Red Wings, Pistons, everybody's not in town, which is too bad. But early kick on Saturday too kind of limits the options. So it's a business trip, guys. Don't forget that.
We're
going 1-0 this week.
What's BC like to travel with?
He's a good travel companion. He's good on long road trips. He can talk, as you would expect. He can talk about a lot of things, and he has good takes on things generally. We're a couple of old guys, so the music genres kind of line up too. We don't get into too many fights about that stuff, so it's always a good time.
Favorite late 90s, early 2000s hits? Is that what's going on there, Bruntzy?
A lot of 90s he's played in that car.
Hey, you love to see it. That's my sweet spot too. Micheal Bruntz, we appreciate your time as always. We'll talk to you next week.
Thanks, guys.
Hey, thanks, Bruntzy.
That is Micheal Bruntz from Husker 24/7. Coming up next, we're going to play a little Hurrdat Hot Seat with my guy Andrew Rogers here on Hurrdat Sports Radio.
We will be back.